Welcome back to the Obvious Choice podcast. We're talking today about how to generate fresh and creative and useful ideas. I thought that this would be an interesting topic to cover, and so I brought it to Ren and Amber just to see if they had anything that they wanted to contribute. And I think what's going to be really interesting about this is I kind of tackle this in kind of an abstract way, which you'll hear about, whereas Ren and Amber seem to tackle it in a much more tactical way, basically figuring out how to gather things and collect them and save them for ideas. Whereas with me, it's more kind of just finding things out there and exploring and letting that generate ideas. And I'll talk about that a fair bit. But first, why is this so important and how to kind of think about this and approach it? Goes back to Chet Holmes, who we did an episode going over one of his books called The Ultimate Sales Machine. But what he wrote in that book is that in order to be interesting, you have to be interested. And he was talking about this in terms of building rapport and sales, but like a lot of great thoughts, his words can have a lot of interpretations. In order to be interesting to other people, you have to be interested in other people. And you can't possibly be interested in everybody. I just don't think that any of us have the capacity to do that as much as we'd like to. And so you have to be pretty selective in who you are interested in. And I'm really excited to learn from you, Ren, on that, of how you do that, because as we've spoken about time and time again, your niche, the people that you serve are not you. I don't know if you're single. I don't know if you're in a relationship. We know nothing about your personal life. You refuse to share. But
it's true.
There was a picture with you and somebody else who was of the female persuasion the other day on Facebook, and I was going to comment on it, but then I was like, nah, it's his private life. But then I was like, I'll just bring it up on a public podcast.
That's better.
Yeah.
Such a better decision, John. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was at the GHO, John. That was my homecoming for college. There were many pictures of me with many lovely women persons.
Did you bring anybody with you to the homecoming?
I did. I brought my friend Sean.
Shauna? I know nothing about you. I give up.
And I almost said Pat just to really piss you off, but
I know. Just pick some
some non-gender specific name.
That would have been funny.
Pat and I went.
I'd love to hear from one of you two first before I get into how I generate fresh and creative and useful ideas for myself. Do you guys have a preference over who goes first? Do we want to let ladies go first, Ren?
Always, John. Ladies always go first. That's what I told Pat.
I'm so confused now. Amber, you ready to go?
Yeah, sure. So, for me, the bigger problem is quieting my brain enough to be creative. So it's naturally creative. That's not the problem. My problem is getting it to just simmer down. And so the way I often kind of talk about it is like, if you ever play a video game and you have a kid that's bugging you about wanting to play too, right? And so you give them a controller, but you don't plug it in. So it feels like they're playing, but so you can play the game. And so my brain's kind of like that. It has this annoying little kid in the background, like, I want to play. Can I do it? What are you doing? And doing, all of these annoying things that makes it hard for you to focus playing the game. And so you have to give it a fake controller. And so that's what I do, is I have to find a way to give the little child in my brain a fake controller so the adult side of my brain can do the work. And so often this is having some kind of background noise that is interesting enough to keep the child happy, but not so interesting the adult pays attention to. Or doing things like that's why my house is constantly changing colors. Painting walls is a really great kind of cathartic thing that lets me think. It requires enough focus, but not too much. Driving does the same thing. And so these kind of, it requires enough attention to be safe and to be methodical, but not so much attention that you have to really dive deep into it. And so when I can do those types of activities, all of these ideas will come, which is why all of my best ideas come when I'm driving, which is really unfortunate because it's harder to capture those ideas. But
yeah. Dr. Gloria Mark talks about this a fair bit. So she's the Chancellor's Professor at the University of California and focuses on informatics, basically the interplay between technology and humans, with a particular focus on attention and focus. And so how can we be focused? How can we give our attention in a world of technology? And one of the things that her lab has identified is actually how important rote tasks are for maintaining our attention. Because they allow our brains to relax, but not completely relax. Like your analogy of like give it a controller in the background, I feel is apt based off of her research. Because it does need to be almost distracted in a way, but distracted and not doing anything that takes any kind of really higher level functioning. She made an argument towards playing stupid little games on your phone every so often. One of the things that I do if I'm, let's say, writing and I've kind of lost my train of thought or I'm working on a hard problem is I'll go outside and go for a walk around the block or rake the leaves for 20 minutes and then come back in. Something that takes some attention but doesn't distract you, so your brain can almost work on the stuff in the background and come to these connections. What she does say, particularly with a lot of these like games on your phones, like I think they talked about it in terms of Candy Crush. She actually made an argument towards playing things like Candy Crush, but what she said is that it's most effective to have an end time and some sort of commitment at the end. So that you're not just saying, I'm just going to play Candy Crush for 10 minutes, and then you have nothing at the end of 10 minutes. Instead, you decide that you're going to turn on your phone and play Candy Crush when you have a meeting in 10 minutes. That way you know that there's a hard stop, and so you still get that it's almost a way for your brain to relax and make sense of everything that it's taken in, but you also have that hard stop to make sure your time doesn't get taken away from you.
It's funny you say that because I listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff, and I'll play either Wudoku or Merge Dragons while I listen, so I actually can listen. Otherwise, I can't sit and actually listen, or I'll clean. Cleaning's a big creative sparker for me. Is doing that. So listening to podcasts, if I had to sit here and listen, I wouldn't hear a single word. But if I clean, play a game, I hear everything, and boom, 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 just everything's pinging.
That's so interesting. Just generally. I find it interesting. My brain operates the exact opposite way.
You need to have silence. Well,
yeah.
I mean, I think that it's good that all three of us have this and have kind of different approaches, because my approach is different too. I'll get into it in a second. But I think it's very useful to have these three approaches to highlight the fact that, everybody does function a little bit differently, and that's cool. I was listening to an interview the other day about it was talking about the power of books. It was part of an interview. This interview wasn't about that, but it was just about the power of books and how books have kind of withstood, almost surprisingly, this digital revolution. Like even physical books. Why? Who would have expected that? Everybody thought that books were going to die, and yet books are actually doing better than they've ever done. Mm-hmm. And the difference between a book and a podcast, so the authors were talking about long-form writing versus podcasting, and this isn't to say that one is better than the other one, but the thing with a book, particularly like long-form writing, something that people purchase like a book versus like a long-form article written on the internet, is that people have paid for it, so there's some of that cost. But also, when you're reading a book, it's very difficult to focus on anything else. And as a result, you are in it. You are focusing on that thing. It is very rare when you're listening to a podcast that you're ever not doing something else. As a result, a podcast is kind of, you're not, and you don't pay for it. So as a result, when you listen to podcasts or social media content or whatever it is, you're almost always doing something else. You're very rarely paying that much attention to it. And you also haven't spent any money on it, which means you're not bought in on that actually solving any kind of a problem. So it's really just collecting more information. As the producer of that information, you have to also understand that a lot of the time, in almost every case, somebody consuming this type of information from those mediums is actually doing it in a very distracted way. As opposed to somebody who's reading a book of yours, for example, or somebody who's doing something that they've paid for of yours, where the odds are that they're going to be a lot more focused on that thing. And I think that there's a good and a bad of that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about, I'll get into a little bit about how I approach finding fresh and creative ideas. I don't think that there are many new things to talk about. I don't think that I am smart enough or wise enough or my knowledge in anything is advanced enough to actually bring something new to the table. I'm not a leading researcher in anything. I think that I know a lot about a lot of different things, but I don't think that I have a super advanced knowledge base of any one thing. And that's part of my philosophy, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, of how I approach knowledge gain, where I actually will put in very, very distinct focused periods to try to gain an 80-20 knowledge of a subject over the course of 2 or 3 months. Well, I'll go all in and I'll study that thing, and then I'll learn enough about it, and I'll try to hit that kind of point of diminishing returns with that knowledge base. And then I'll add that, and then I'll move on to the next. I'm not actually trying to gain a higher level knowledge of anything, because I don't think that there's that much value. I actually think that there's more value in being able to combine a whole bunch of schools of thought than there is to become super advanced in one. And then what I try to do is I try to figure out how to communicate these things in new and unique and interesting ways, both because it makes me more interesting, but also because different people I have found respond to different types of messaging. And there are a lot of very important messages like be yourself, for example. Yeah, I think that there's power in the fact that everybody has a different response to a different message. And so you communicating the same underlying message, but in a bit different way with a bit different story it's going to hit people in a different way. And this is why a lot of the details in a story really matter. I will often give very obscure details, not a lot, but 1 or 2 very obscure details. For example, I recorded just a quick video this morning. I had just a spurt of inspiration where I wanted to record a quick video this morning. And I didn't say from my workout this morning, I said specifically from my CrossFit workout this morning, boom, 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 boom. And it wasn't about CrossFit, but what that means is that somebody who does CrossFit or whatever might connect with that story in a way that they would not otherwise, because there's this one detail that makes it specific to them. It doesn't take away from the message, but it adds to the message with other people. So I think about travel a lot when I think about finding fresh and creative and useful ideas. Basically, anytime I find myself turning my head and saying, that was interesting, what happened? Or even just when you're walking down the street, try to think about why. So, I witnessed selling at the height of its power in a small, obscure market in Thailand. Because in this tiny market, in the town of Pai, which is, God, I don't even remember where it is. I think it's in the north of Thailand. I don't even remember. But this tiny market where everybody sells unique things that are not actually unique, where every stand is basically the exact same. How do you stand out? Well, there was one stand that surrounded all of their stand, all of their trappings of their thing was gold. And it was fake gold, but it looked like it was fancier than the other stands. They sold the exact same shit. There's probably 50 other stands at this big market. And they had a huge lineup and nobody else did. Because what they realized was that the majority of the people there at that market were tourists, were looking to bring home gifts to their friends and family. They were not price sensitive. What they wanted was some sort of a story in order to bring home a gift for their people. And so these people that ran the stand were smart enough to realize that if they make their stand look unique and look almost fancier than the other ones, then they could charge twice as much for the same thing and have a lineup around the door. Well, that's actually a really interesting idea and story, but when you wrap it into, hey, this is a market in Thailand that I was at, it brings a new element. there was a metal spoon in Toronto that stopped me in my tracks. I was walking down the street after a workout with Allison one day, and there were two people. There were two women outside of a restaurant, a new restaurant. I didn't recognize it. That were offering samples. You see this all the time. Somebody's offering a little sample of something, and they said tiramisu. Whatever. Sure, we're hungry. We're after workout. We take it, and you needed a spoon to eat this thing, or a fork, or utensil, or something like that. And they gave us one, but it was a metal spoon that they gave us, and so our momentum was taking us away because we were walking away from this restaurant, but the metal spoon stopped us because convention dictates you don't steal somebody's metal spoon. Because they gave us a metal spoon, we stopped to eat this little tiramisu. What do you do at that point? Well, hey, so what is this place? Oh, it's a vegan, gluten-free Italian restaurant that you're open. So, like, first of all, vegan, gluten-free Italian food is not a thing. Like, why you're trying way too hard. And still, we were hungry, so we went in, and they had given us a gift, so there's a lot of reciprocity there. So we went in and we bought our lunch there. $38 later, after a terrible meal, we left and said bye to the women in front. Now, we didn't go back, and that place went under because their food was overpriced and not very good. But they still got us to try it. Whereas they would not have otherwise gotten us to try it if they did not give us a metal spoon. Pretty interesting. There was a random guy selling bandaids on a bus in Uruguay. Here's what happened there. This guy would get on. We didn't really know what was happening because it was Uruguay and nobody speaks English, and we didn't really speak Spanish at that point too well at all. So we had no idea what was going on basically ever. Side note, Uruguay and Montevideo, every single name of a street, or almost all of the names of the streets, are names of like military leaders or important dates in the country's history. But the problem is that makes the street names really, really long. And when you have a small map, or any kind of map really, what they do is they shorten the name of the name to fit onto the map. The problem is when like 37 different streets have something to do with April or Abril in Spanish, then all that you see on the map is the exact same acronym of Abril, and you have no idea what street you're on ever. So not only did we not speak the language, we couldn't even read a map or know where we were because the map names were all shortened and all the same. Side note on that one. But this guy would get onto the bus and he would be selling Band-Aids. And Alice and I, people get on the subway in New York City and they're selling candies for their kid's basketball team or whatever. This guy was selling Band-Aids. We're like, what the hell is going on? Like, who's going to buy these Band-Aids? This guy literally had just like a box of Band-Aids from a pharmacy, and he was selling them one at a time to people on the bus. And then this woman bought one. And then another woman bought one. And then another woman bought one. And after 5 or 6 women bought them, he got off the bus at the next stop. He walked across the street and he hopped on the bus going the other way. And he was just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then we realized why. Montevideo is a very, very old town that has cobblestone streets. And at that point, this was a number of years ago, I don't know if it's still the case, but at that point, the women who were there, it was a very old-fashioned kind of dress-up kind of culture, where the women were, on almost every case, wearing high heels. Combined high heels with cobblestone streets, all of these women have blisters on their feet. Poor women, ridiculous, but that's what it was. And this guy figured out how to sell the perfect item at the perfect time to the perfect audience by selling Band-Aids on the bus in Uruguay. There's a lot you can do with that story. And so on, and so on, and so on. But it doesn't have to be about travel. Talking to people and hearing their stories can also result in a lot of brilliance. There's this guy named Joe Weldon who I met on a golf course at Sunset, and he has these cans. It's called Success Comes in Cans, Not Cannots. And he coined this line, and he started buying cans of tomato soup and ripping off the label and putting his own custom label on these cans. And every time that he'd meet somebody, it was his business card. There are 500,000 cans that say success comes in cans, not in cannots now. Because every time he did a talk, he gave them out. And people would take pictures of them. People would talk about them. People started to buy them from his web store because they became so popular. And these were his literal business card. Like on the back of it was his information for motivational speaking and things. Again, just a really fun story of, hey, how can you do something that's just a little bit different? Doesn't take much, but just a little bit different. What I found is that if you open your goddamn eyes when you walk around, everybody has a story, and there are lots of stories around you, and those stories are interesting, and those stories have lessons. But you need to look up from your stupid fucking phone, and you need to open your eyes, and you need to recognize them. But even if you aren't able to travel, or you don't leave your neighborhood that often, and your neighborhood doesn't change that much, like mine doesn't, there's still the entire world of literature. And from the comfort of your own home, you can just become entranced by the richness and wonders of the world. There was an article that I wrote. Oh man, what was it called? Oh, the article was called, "Little Do They Realize That Our Hero Doesn't Wear Briefs." One of the things I do when I read, particularly fiction, but also nonfiction, is I just save great lines, and I don't even know how I'm going to use them. This is a line from Calvin and Hobbes. "Little do they realize that our hero doesn't wear briefs." I don't know what it is about it, but that line is just wonderful. And so I saved it. And I have no clue. I had no clue when I saved it what I was going to use it for. But off the top of my head, I can think of 3 articles or pieces of content from this one line that I can talk about. I could talk about letting loose and letting it all hang out, not worrying about what others will think as long as you're being yourself. I could make fun of other fitness mentors who don't know how to build a business of their own, so they try to get others to pay them to build their business by remarking upon South Park's underpants memes, or underwear gnomes, right? Step 1, steal underwear. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, profit. And how that middle step seems to be missing from a lot of the look at me, I'm a 6-figure mentor type person. Or I could talk about Bill Watterson, who's the enigmatic creator of Calvin and Hobbes, and he turned down hundreds of millions of dollars of licensing by refusing to license his characters. He fought hard to maintain control of them, and he knew that once he licensed his characters, making money would quickly become the central focus of his life, and his art, as a result, would suffer. And I can talk about how meaningful that is. You can do a lot when you absorb yourself in the different world. Yeah, I've got other examples, but I don't need to get into them. Ren, are you ready to go? Ren had some audio technical issues, but Ren, I'd love to hear from you if you're good to go.
I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me?
We got you, man.
All right, perfect. So, I have two ways that I usually try to create whatever it is, content. I mean, anything. And one of the best ways for me is a counterpunch, right? So I've got this personality type that's a counterpuncher, and it really comes from a story. It comes from a music story, right? So when I was doing my music thing, et cetera, ran into
Fortress.
Fortress, obviously.
Everybody throw up the 4 fingers.
Mark Young is in the group now, by the way, John. Around his birthday, good. I initiated him. So if we go back on stage, Mark's going with us. Shout out to you, Mark. But I ran into a DJ, a well-known DJ in hip-hop. His name is Kid Capri. And for anybody that ever watched the Def Comedy Jam that happened in the 90s, Kid Capri was a DJ who introduced Martin Lawrence, who would then introduce all the acts. And he told us once that he used to be a rapper, not a DJ. I said, well, what changed for you? I mean, being a rapper, that's a lot more prestigious. He said, I realized that if I was going to be a rapper, I would have to constantly create songs. And the genre changes and it shifts. And there's a lot of pressure in being relevant in the industry as you're creating songs. But he said, I realized if I was a DJ, that there would always be songs that would be relevant and popular. And I'd have an endless amount of things that I could spin on the turntables, on the 1s and 2s, as they are, John. And I utilize that methodology for creating content because there's always going to be questions, there's always going to be concerns, And as long as there's a social media or anything, really, people are going to voice them. So a lot of my content creation is based on being interested first and attempt to be interesting. I answer tons of questions. I see people complain about things on social media, and I jump into the conversation, not unlike what Amber does, like religiously in the various groups associated with the Personal Trainer Development Center. It's a great way of creating content, because what I'm effectively doing is I'm finding the questions and I will invert the question to create the content. Someone in a group may say, just had my third son. I was able to lose weight with all my other children, but this one I'm having issues with tummy fat, for instance. Can anybody help, right? And I'll just go in and answer that question. And I usually answer in threes, because I like to do content in threes or fives or sevens. Seven's a lot, but 3 to 5 is pretty okay for me. And I'll say, hey, here's 3 things you might want to consider. And then I invert that. Attention, ladies. Just had a child. Are you in first, or either the 4th trimester, right? Here's 3 things to consider in terms of losing baby weight, particularly if you've never been able to do, if it was never a challenge before. So just pulling through the belly button, so to speak, of the thing, turning it inside out. That's been a great way for me to get content, man.
You could even be so obscenely specific with that.
Absolutely.
You could invert that and create your own post right after you respond to that question. And
right
say,
after you respond.
Hey, if you had 2 kids already and you just
Right.
had your third, and for the first time ever you're having a hard time losing the weight, here's 3 things to think about.
Absolutely. So when we talk to students about creating anything, I have a tendency to lean into content for social media, because that's what I talk about most all day. But I would imagine if I was summarizing it, if I was writing an article, even if I dared to write a book on a specific subject, amount of I'm not going to do that, John. Don't worry about it.
Don't do it, man.
It's really simple for me to be a counterpuncher. I'm not always thinking about creating the thing. I'm just going out and looking for all the information, the questions that are already there, and then I spin them on the 1s and 2s at social media parties, man. So that's my first methodology for having consistency in creating content, and it's something that I challenge our students about. I did that today. Shout out to Sonia. I did that today when our students are confused about creating some type of messaging or content. I will almost immediately reply, how many people are you interacting with out there in the social media verse? So that's number one.
Social media verse or real life verse. I mean, it's not
any
dissimilar
verse
from what I was talking about. It's hey, when was the last time you kind of got out of your own world and your own kind of zone? Whether that's your zone looking down at the phone and not experiencing the world around you, and just all of the like fun, interesting stuff. Like I shot a quick video today. It'll go up on my social media at some point in the next couple of weeks, probably. And I got home from my workout this morning, and I thought, how interesting was that workout? It was the first time I realized it. I was like, there were 9 people there. Skin colors and ethnicities, we had white, black, Chinese, Vietnamese. Ages ranged from 35 to 62. There were straights and there were gays. And it didn't matter at all when we were there. And how... Yet, when you turn on social media, you turn on the news, all that you hear is divisiveness. All that you hear are culture clashes and disputes. And I'm not downplaying any of that, and I still think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But I also believe that there has been a lot of tremendous work that has already been done. And I think it's valuable to recognize both of those. I mean, this was just a workout that I did this morning where I looked around the room and I was just, this is actually pretty amazing when you think about it. And I think what you're talking about is similar too. With me, I was talking about it in terms of walking up and down the streets at night or in our neighborhood or in the gym or whatever you're talking about with social media, to me, it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's just a micro. It's just a different. Everything boils down to being able to communicate with the next human. There are several different pathways to do it. I could walk down the hall of my apartment building for the next 30 minutes, and people are going to come out of the apartments or off the elevator. Some are going to have dogs. Some are going to have kids. Right? That's a social media channel outside my door. Right?
Yeah.
I can go to my local Front Porch Sundays here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where everybody goes down near the railway and they sell their wares and they walk their dogs and they walk with it. That's another social media channel. It's just not on the internet. And I think people don't realize the better skilled you are at having human interaction, the more easily you can adjust the interaction to a different social media channel. But you first need the fundamental ability to be an interested human. Kind of everything else derives from that. And most people who struggle with this, I think if they did a gut check, they would realize they're just not a very interested human.
Yeah. That's
bites you in the butt.
element.
Yeah.
That's the missing
Well, they're
element.
trying to drive the conversation, right? Because they have a goal in mind. And that's the problem we see with all of our students. Well, how do I get the conversation to go this way? Stop making the conversation go that way. Ask questions. Be actually curious. And that's like most of the people that I know that are wildly successful, like they're a little weird. They have all of these different, it's true. We have all these different little hobbies and interests and, talk too much or too loud, too shy, too something, by society standards. And they are constantly trying to learn and connect in that way. And they have their own little groups of people that they get to like be extra with. Right. And so like all of my favorite people, like Scott Drummond, like are constantly, he's trying to teach me D&D right now. Like I'm terrified, but I'm super excited too. Cause I am not into like
I don't know what D&D
pretending.
Is.
Dungeons and Dragons.
John.
And so
I knew what it was. I just wanted to feel cooler saying that I didn't
Okay.
know what it was.
Sure. So you've kind of got the Dungeon Master look with the hoodie on right now. But he tells these fantastic stories, right? And like that's the cool thing is I learn so much from him because he tells all of these stories. So making friends with people that do more than just work, go home, watch TV, go to bed,
Right.
and asking questions about their what you might consider odd hobbies. Oh my gosh, the crazy ideas that I come up with just from talking to him, because he told me about like a villain that he created that's now in this other dimension and now it's coming back with demons and stuff. I don't know. He'll explain more to me later. But like all of these things that he's created, like it sparked so many interesting ideas that I can use. So like make friends with people that do things and ask questions.
There's so much there, isn't there? There's so much when you think about games like that, or when you think about just like geeky or weird interests like that. I really, really enjoy people who are just unabashedly themselves. There's this guy, he used to be in our industry, now he's just a general marketing guy, but it seems like he's doing well. I haven't spoken to him about his success for a while. We usually just shoot the shit, but he's very out there and loud and unique, and it's pure like get rich, get laid type marketing. And a friend of mine asked me about him one time. I think I commented on something that he did, and a friend of mine asked me, he's like, hey man, do you know him? Like what do you think about him? Like, I'm seeing this guy all over the place. Looks like you're supporting of him. I'm like, honestly, I've never worked with him in the capacity of which his business operates. He owns an agency or whatever. I've never worked with him in that capacity. I can't comment on that. I just really, really enjoy people who are just unabashedly themselves. And I've spent a lot of time with him. This is a guy that I spent 2 hours with him and his now wife in a Turkish fake purse store in Kotor, Montenegro, where they were assessing the stitching of these fake poses to see how real they looked, to see whether they could pass them off as real, and then after 2 hours realized that, no, I think my friends might notice. I love that shit! Hilarious! That is hilarious. So ridiculously weird and just idiotic in every single way, and I am here for it 100%. I was enthralled. I was so in that conversation.
They put the work in. That's awesome.
People think this way? This is amazing. Tell me how you're thinking. This is incredible.
I just realized something as you guys were having this discussion. I think that one of the challenges with a lot of people is that I don't think that they lean into themselves enough to be interested in their own damn self, right? And I think that's why I can predict 3 for 3 that if someone came to either of the three of us and told us their story and then said, I can't figure out what my unique selling proposition is, probably within 30 seconds of hearing the story or I can't figure out who my target audience should be. Probably in 30 seconds of hearing the story, we could blurt out probably 2 to 5 different things that are in alignment with who they are. It's right. Just that people kind of just don't consider themselves to be very interesting because they're so fixated on creating what they think is the desired facade of their life that they don't listen to their own story at all. And it's hard for them to create something around themselves because they don't first take interest in themselves enough for themselves to be interesting. And I just realized that as you were talking about that guy, he's all in on himself. The get rich, get laid guy, he's all in.
He's so all in on it. And like, it ain't for me. I'm never going to buy from him.
Right.
But goddamn, I respect how all in he is.
Right.
Like...
Oh, man. And most people are so confused about being okay with themselves. Like, they really struggle to be okay with who they actually are. And that's just a delay. That's a delay. You cannot create anything consistently from that space. It's impossible. It's impossible to do it.
Well, this episode was a lot about idea generation and being creative, and so I'm going to recommend another episode for you to check out now, and it's episode 60. It's called The One About Content. This one was more about generating ideas. That episode 60, is more about, hey, how do you actually think about content? How do you actually fit that into your day? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you not trying to accomplish with content based off of your goals, not the goals of like social media, which are often very different. And so I think that these 2 episodes really go well together. So check that one out. Scroll back a fair bit because we're at, I don't even know what episode this is, 140 or something like that. But episode 60, scroll back in the feed, and it's called The One About Content. Hope that you love it. And as always, if you're on Spotify, please go to like a general page for this podcast, hit the rating thing, give us 5 stars, and hope you have a good day.